Good morning, everyone. A little bit later than normal, but Kate and Fiona joining you for this week's Facebook Live, where we continue to talk about authenticity and speaking your truth. And Fee, this is a really interesting one. There's lots of kind of grey and murky waters in this space, particularly when we start to think about speaking our truth. And, you know, we talk a lot. Last week, we did a webinar on communicating with confidence. And I think all we did was talk about some of the things that get in our way of really speaking our truth. But there's also this context piece of the environment you're operating in. How does speaking your truth impact your personal brand? And of course, then this other tricky dynamic, which is, modern day leadership talks about being vulnerable. And so we want to be vulnerable and share with our leaders. But, what's the calibration of all of these really grey topics?
I think this is such a good question to be asking ourselves. And one of the things we're curious about is, how do we find this sweet spot between, that willingness to be vulnerable, that willingness to speak up, to actually share what's going on for us. And, then the tendency to overshare, what's going on here between that there's a richness in sharing more of ourselves and absolutely revealing more of who we are. And as you say, there's a really important context piece. And our workplaces are complex. There's lots of different dynamics playing out. There's lots of different rules, both formal and informal. And we're navigating those all the time. And so there's a really important awareness piece here, awareness of ourselves, of what's going on, and also awareness of what's happening around us. Because in certain situations, some things are going to be worth sharing and are going to be important to speak up about. And in other situations, we really have to calibrate that, because the impact of that on us, or potentially the dynamic we're navigating, may actually be quite detrimental. And so that awareness piece is thinking, what are the likely outcomes when I do something and when I share something that perhaps could have a little bit of a controversial edge to it, or might land badly for other people.
Yeah, I love this. I think one of the things that's really important is to start with getting clear, which is, what is your truth? What is it you want to say? And why? What's the impact, the outcome you're seeking to create? I think it's really easy to stay in the grey. It's really easy to stay confused. And it's the confusion that can really have us kind of going around and round in circles, often in our brain, and ruminating and being really unclear and feel stuck. So clarity creates courage, clarity creates confidence. Being able to get clear about what you want to say, why you want to say it, the outcome you're seeking to achieve. Then thinking about that in context of the environment that you're operating in, your key stakeholders, and how that impacts your brand, right? Which is how others see you. And so that clarity of piece is really just a distinction of, okay, now I've got better information with which to make a decision. Of course, even when we think about being authentic and speaking our truth, there's a whole lot of roadblocks and red flags that can get in the way of us actually then even being able to follow through. But clarity really is the starting point.
Yes, the more that we're clear, the easier it is to start to make choices about what we're going to do in each situation. And I think the reluctance, to look at this, and also the fears, the natural fears that come up, because, it's quite confronting when we are told by leadership gurus to be more vulnerable. Like, that's the thing we want to see more of you. We want you to bring your whole self to work. All of these catch cries of leadership, they're quite inviting, but they also can feel a bit unnerving, because if that's what I need to do to be authentic and I don't know how it's going to land, we're naturally going to feel a bit reticent and as though there's something at risk. And these are the very natural fears that we need to actually be conscious of, start to name, start to think about what they are, and potentially to test, to get some feedback around. If we're considering doing something and it doesn't feel completely as though, I'm comfortable, I'm confident, I'm ready to do that, we've got peers, we've got mentors, we've got other people in the system that we can start to test our ideas. We don't necessarily have to go out full tilt to a large group of people, we can do those small acts of confidence. What are the small steps I can do as I start to test and really start to connect into what would be a useful way to share myself authentically and to share more of my truth? And where might it might be important to have some boundaries because that's not appropriate and not useful to this particular context.
Yeah, as you were talking, psychological safety came up, right? Which is being able to feel like it is safe. It's curious that bring your whole self to work, be authentic. In theory, if we felt safe to share, we would be sharing. So I think there's always some interesting and tricky things to dig into there. But I love just this piece around small experiments, test and learn. Once you're clear about what you want to say, why you want to say, you're aware of the context that you're operating in and the consequences of, potentially being authentic or speaking that particular truth. And, you're really clear about maybe what might be stopping you, taking those small acts of confidence in that context, getting some feedback and some evidence of what worked well, what maybe didn't work well. That's of course going to happen at points in time. And then recalibrating after that. That is how we start to show up and not only influence our thinking and the stories we're telling ourselves that are driving the show, but start to have a bigger impact in the organizations in which we work, which is really important because we know that there's a lot of unspoken, unsaid contribution, that many of the women we work with talk about. And of course, the minute they start testing and learning with this staff, taking those small acts of confidence, all of a sudden they have new information, new intel, start to build new habits that really serve them in terms of how they show up in the workplace and how they achieve their career goals. So lots of important stuff to dig into. If you've enjoyed today's confidence conversation, please share it with anyone in your network who you think would find it valuable. Of course, if you'd like to find more out about Core Confidence, head over to our Facebook page. Lots of great videos for you to dig into. You'll find lots that's interesting there, as well as if you would like to go deeper with your relationship with Core Confidence, visit our website, coreconfidence.com.au.